What's up, party people? Today we're going to be talking about the all-new 2023 Foes Ridgeback. This thing's brand new for 2023, so let's get you all the details. Hey guys, my name is Toby and this is my channel Broken Spokes, where I'm taking you along for the ride. This is going to be all about the 2023 Foes Ridgeback. I want to get you all the deets. I'm going to let you know all the things that you should know, all the things you didn't know you needed to know, and probably a lot more silly opinions. So stick around and check it out. There will be chapters below if there's anything you're particularly interested in and don't have the patience, but I know you're probably on the toilet at work, so stick around for a little bit longer. Oh, what's this? It's drying out here in Spokane, and this morning on this thing, things got a little western as I went around a corner. So the first thing we should talk about is, what is this thing? This is not a commonly seen bike. Foes is a boutique bike manufacturer that hand makes their frames and all the components on them out of their shop in Southern California. This Ridgeback is a 29-inch 135 millimeter trail bike. I've got mine paired with a 140 up front, and it is a burly trail eating machine. New for 2023, they've redesigned their hydroform top tube, a much more optimized down tube, and then they've drastically simplified this bottom bracket cluster down here. The geometry got a major refresh. We'll talk about that here in just a minute. On paper, this thing looks incredible. In real life, this thing looks sweet. It just seems like every single bike out there is starting to look exactly the same, and this thing doesn't. This thing stands out, and I think it looks crisp. Let me know in the comments below what you think about it, because I am a big fan of how this thing looks. Now, why did I get a trail bike? Some time ago, I got a small travel 29er bike. This is a Carbonda FM 936, and I rode this thing hard for a number of years. This is a great bike, and I have a lot of fun on this, but the thing that I kept running into is that I was riding this way too hard for what it was intended. I was getting really nervous that these chain stays and seat stays could potentially snap. This is not a knock on this bike at all. This is a fantastic machine. This is more of a knock on my selection of bike, because I rode this thing way too freaking hard. Now, another aspect that went into me getting the Ridgeback is that a few years ago, I actually got this mixer from them, and I have been beyond stoked on how well this thing rides. This is an insanely capable enduro bike. I get reminded of how much I love this bike every single time I'm on it. And because I was riding this so much and I had it all over my YouTube videos and whatnot, the guys at Foes actually reached out to me to see if I wanted in early on their new Ridgeback that they were releasing. Of course I did. That was right about the time that I started realizing how much I was overriding that Carbonda. And because I'm so enamored by how well this bike rides, I was more than game to give their new Ridgeback a try. I'm not affiliated with Foes, I'm not paid by them. I paid for both of these bikes with my own money, and so all of the opinions about both of them are entirely my own. I'm just a big fan of Made in the US, and these guys make a killer product.
Alrighty team, let's jump right into the geometry. I am riding a size medium. I'm 5'10". I've got a 6'1" wingspan and a 32-inch inseam, and the medium has fit me really well. Some of the numbers that I keep in mind are essentially all of them: the reach, the stack, head tube angle, the chainstay length, bottom bracket height, and the overall wheelbase. If we're looking at these in comparison to what a lot of bikes are today, the reach and stack numbers are pretty much bang on, kind of exactly what you'd be looking for in a modern trail bike. And then that chainstay length is pretty long. That's about 5 to 10 millimeters longer than most. Is what this is telling me is that this is going to be a great modern trail bike that's really going to handle a lot of the aggressive riding that we all seem to be doing today. And while I've been working on this recording, a bike that got released and is making some huge waves is the Transition Smuggler. Now, if I compare that to the Transition Smuggler, it is almost bang on. So the travel numbers, the Ridgeback has 5 millimeters more rear travel. I still have mine set up with a 140 fork. The reach is slightly longer. The stack on the Smuggler is just a touch higher at 616 versus 610. Head tube angle, exactly the same. I'm gonna scoot out of the way here. The chainstay is about 10 millimeters shorter, and I think that that's gonna be the major difference in how these two bikes ride. And then bottom bracket height is right about the same, and wheelbase is slightly shorter, mainly due to that long chainstay on the Ridgeback. I haven't ridden a Smuggler. I'd love to give it a try. If you want an American-made version of the Smuggler, a very modern trail bike, I think the Ridgeback makes a pretty compelling case for itself on these numbers.
Now, a quick bike spec on how this thing is built up so that we can jump right into some other aspects. Starting at the back here, I've got these 29-inch no-name carbon rims from a local bike shop paired up with their Bitex hubs. I'm running these Bontrager XR5s. I've got Cushcore XC in the back here just to protect that carbon rim. I've got an 11-speed XT drivetrain, SRAM descendant cranks. I'm mixing SRAM and Shimano. Don't tell anybody, but it works just fine. DVO Topaz and a DVO Diamond. This is it set at 140. I'm thinking about bumping that up to 150, but don't quite have the right tools just yet. This is a P&W dropper set at 150 millimeters of travel. If you get this, just note that I was running into the bottom bracket cluster down here with this insertion length, and so this is a 170 dropper that I had to shim down to 150. And I do wish was a little different on this, is that you could insert that a little bit more. Up here I'm running Deity carbon bars with a 40 millimeter stem, and then I've just got Shimano XT and the P&W lever. And I realized I forgot to talk about my brakes, but I've got the best brakes on the market, and that's going to be the Hayes Dominions. I've got A2s on this and I've got A4s on my mixer. Love these things, chef's kiss, they are so good. One of the things with the mixer is you can't fit a water bottle inside the cage, which doesn't bother me. That top tube mount, how they have it, actually it works super well. But you can fit a full-size water bottle in here if you're a water bottle snob like I'm not. Hey Hazel. Oh yeah. Some of the things I really like about this frame is just some of the little details that they do. So they've got their logo embossed right here. This sharp hydroform tubing right here just looks crisp and nice. They've got the Made in the US sticker on the back. They've got Ridgeback 29 machined into this swing arm assembly, and it just looks good. Like, there's just little details that really make it stand out, and I'm a big fan of it. Okay, first things first is you need to get yourself a VHS chainstay protector. These bikes do not come with a chainstay protector, and this is an incredible investment. Right out of the gate, this bike is a little bit loud. That took most all of the trail noise out of it. The other thing to note is with this VHS tape, these chainstays are so burly that there's hardly any room between your crank and your chainstay. I wish that they would push this chainstay back. There's plenty of clearance in here to move it back 2 or 3 millimeters in order to give your crank just a little bit more clearance, because that VHS tape is super thick. So I'm actually gonna have to take this and cut it out because this is starting to fold up. But just note, you need some sort of chainstay protector in order to quiet that bike down, and then it's gonna be kind of thick, so just note that. When you route your cables here, they come into the down tube, and then they exit out of this port here. They wrap around the main pivot and then make an S, they kind of make an S curve around this main pivot, before forking out right over this bridge. Now, when you build this up, make sure you fit some heat shrink and some zip ties back here. It's a little bit extra effort, but man, does it clean it up and just make it look nice and crisp on the trail. The other thing is that when you're routing these cables working back to front, absolutely do not forget to put some cable dampening in this. This is not tube and tube, and so those cables slapping around inside that hollow aluminum tube is pretty loud when you're going down the trail. I have my shifter coming out the bottom, I have my brake coming out this middle port, and then I have my dropper post coming out the top. This is one of my biggest gripes with this bike, is that because you have single-sided cable routing, this dropper, it has to make this awkward kink to go into the down tube, and I'm just not a huge fan of that. This ISCG actually adds to your dub spacing. I actually went ahead and had to not follow the SRAM guidelines, and I think this is just a 2 mil spacer on the other side, and there is no spacer on this side. One of the coolest things also about this is that it does come with the SRAM UDH. There is already future-proofing built into the swing arm assembly. If you've got more money than I do, you can put that sweet new SRAM drivetrain on there. That's something I wish I could get, but not gonna be anytime soon. When it comes to the brakes, they're actually already set up for the 180 rotors, and you don't have to put any spacers in there, which I really like. I don't know why bike companies ever fiddle with anything lower than 180 unless it's an XC bike. One thing to note about this bike is that there is no geometry adjustments. There's no flip chip, so what you get is what you get. I can't quite tell if that's a good or a bad thing as somebody who loves to tinker. On one hand, I totally recognize that I could be the problem with how my bike's riding when it comes to the bike setup. On the other hand, these guys know what they're doing and they make a sweet product, and so it's kind of up to you. I do think that if they offered some adjustment plates to maybe raise that bottom bracket or drop it ever so slightly, I think that would be killer. Just know that you get essentially a static bike and you don't get all of that adjustment built into it.
Bike weight. I've actually never weighed this thing, so we're gonna kind of do it live. Don't have a good scale, so we're gonna do it this way. 158 flat. 193.2. It's a burly bike. At 35 pounds, this thing is kind of portly. Keep in mind that I did not build this thing up to be a weight weenie, and I really don't think that bike weight is the biggest deal in the world. And the thing rides great, so it's not something I'm too concerned about or going to be working on reducing. Now, if weight is something you're concerned about, here's a few things that I would do differently if I had an unlimited budget and wasn't cannibalizing another bike to make this thing. Include things like pedals, the suspension itself, cushion core could be removed, different brakes, different dropper post, and then maybe drivetrain could lose some weight there. Overall, I think reasonably you could lose up to almost 3 pounds on this build, but like I said, I'm not too worried about it. Just wanted to get you guys the information in the event that 35 pounds is too much for you. The next thing to do is jump into a quick bike nerdery, where we're going to be using a picture I pulled off the Foes website. I overlaid it on the Linkage software, and we're going to be going over how a lot of the kinematics go through this. I am not a professional, so I'm going to be just going through exactly how this bike is expected to perform on paper, and I matched all the points up as best I could with the published geometry. It's good enough for me, for my armchair quarterbacking, and we'll get right into it. One quick note is that at 135 millimeters of travel, sag between 20 and 30% is going to equate to about 27 to 40 millimeters of travel. All right, the first output graph that we want to look at from the linkage system is the pedal curve. This thing is wildly progressive. You can see it drops from 3.65 down to 2.5, and so that's going to be the instantaneous leverage rate as it's going through that suspension. Super progressive. Kind of a funny story on this is when I first got the bike, I set the Topaz up and I went and put 2 bands in the positive chamber because that's how I ride my mixer. And what was happening is that on any hit, it would hit that mid-stroke so hard that it would cause the fork to dive. This was before I ever did any linkage analysis. This totally jives with how the bike rides. It is entirely bottomless. I really don't ever hit the stops on the rear suspension, and it's been super solid. Looking at pedal kickback, this thing as a single pivot does have quite a bit of pedal kickback, but pairing that with some sort of mid engagement hubs I think is sort of the sweet spot. Based on this graph, I should see up to 11 degrees of pedal kickback. I'll note that I really haven't experienced that on the trail. Could also be because I've been riding single pivot bikes for the past 4 or 5 years, and I just don't have a good baseline of comparison to that. As I'm going down the trail, I'm not really feeling that feedback back into the pedals, and it's been totally fine. I would never have guessed that it was this high. Looking at the anti-squat, or basically how this thing pedals, the bike never dips below 100% anti-squat, and so all the power that you're putting into the pedals is going to be transferred into the bike, causing that suspension to extend a little bit and keeping that rear wheel moving forward. You're not going to be really experiencing any pedal bob or anything like that, and this totally jives with how I've felt on the trail. This thing always feels sure-footed, and like every little bit of power you're putting into it is propelling you forward and not just compressing that suspension. And on the descents, the anti-rise goes from about 119 down to about 94%. The vast majority, or first 2/3 of your suspension travel is going to be above 100%. So that means that as you're braking, that suspension is slightly compressing, keeping that rear wheel on the ground. Above 105 millimeters, as you're braking, that suspension is going to extend a little bit, but keep in mind that that last 20 millimeters of travel, that's a big hit, and your bike is going to back out of that fairly quickly. You're not sitting in that compressed range for a long period of time. Everything that I've experienced with any kind of skipping or any sort of chatter on the trail like that is because it's really rough, and I would equate that more to suspension setup than it would be to the anti-rise numbers on the bike. So on a big hit, you're going to go clear down to, let's say, 135 millimeters of travel. You're going to basically instantly back right back out of that, and you're going to sit right in that beautiful sweet spot of anti-rise, giving you solid braking performance and keeping that bike totally under control. All right, well, hopefully that gives you a little bit of on paper discussion as to how this bike's going to perform as you're going down the trail. And so let's jump right into the actual ride quality of the bike. That medium is extremely comfortable. I fell right into position. It felt great in the parking lot, as well as the first few little descents I went through. Man, this thing is stout. You immediately feel how stiff the frame is and how responsive the pedaling is going to be. Every little piece of input translates directly into moving you forward. As you go through the turns, frame does not experience any of those sketchy flex that I ran into as I got the Carbonda up to speed. You immediately feel that this is an absolute quality piece of aluminum, ready to handle anything you throw at it. Lateral stiffness seems to be a buzzword that the Ridgeback totally excels at. There is like zero perceptible movement side to side. It feels really good. That's just in the parking lot or just like the first few descents. It's pretty wild how big of a difference it makes. It took some time to dial the suspension in, but this is kind of what I like with the smaller setup, is that each adjustment is more easily noticed than on my 160 bike. I've worked with DVO quite a bit, referencing not just their guides, but also emailing them for a little bit of help. Couldn't recommend them more. They've been extremely responsive, and I've got great customer service from them. My current setup, I'm running 165 PSI in the main chamber of the rear shock. I've got one positive chamber token and one negative chamber token. The rebound, I have slowed it down about 5 clicks from the default setting in the Topaz setup guide, and the bladder is set at 160 PSI, and I find that going any higher has a big impact on the small bump compliance. My fork has 130 PSI. I've got 12 rotations of off the top, and the rebound is 3 clicks slower than the default setting. The high speed compression is pretty much bang on from the DVO recommended, while my low speed I go from about 2 to 4 depending on the trail, 2 for a really chunky trail, 4 for a trail where I'll be pedaling a lot. And now we're going to climb. You've got to earn your turns, folks, and this bike is there to get you to the top. The pedaling is very active, but it's supportive. It moves, but it's not wallowy. It's fluctuating as you're going up the trail, keeping you nice and comfortable. The head tube angle is slack, but it doesn't wander and flop all over the place. And the seat tube is steep enough that there's weight on the front wheel. The Carbonda did climb better. However, it was built for that, and it was also just an absolute rocket ship uphill. This thing is an entirely different category of bike, and I don't at all say that as a bad thing. The longer chainstay does make some of those tight uphill switchbacks a little bit more challenging. That's how I've gotten around that. I've gotten a little bit more precise with my pedals, and then I've also just gotten a little bit more aggressive with my riding stance as I'm going around that switchback. This hasn't been a problem at all. It's just something that I noticed. When you're going uphill and you've got a ledge in front of you, just like a tight, punchy section, As soon as you get that front wheel over the edge, that back wheel follows you effortlessly. It's extremely comfortable, and this thing climbs as good as I could ever expect it to. And now once you get up to the top, how the frig does this thing do when it's pointed down the trail? Long story short, this thing impressed me beyond belief, to the point where I actually entered a local enduro race on this thing. I did our local enduro on a 130 trail bike and ended up doing pretty dang good. Videos down below if you want to see this thing at race pace. I won't spend any more time on that. General riding notes. Again, much like the climbing comment, I was immediately comfortable on this bike. The general feel of the bike is extremely confidence inspiring. It is just solid, and it is underneath you, ready to handle whatever you throw at it. The medium is still a great fit for me to ride the bike rather than just hanging on to a bike that's too big. It seems like everything going longer, lower, and slacker. I think a lot of people are on bikes that are too big for them, and they're just hanging on for dear life. So if I were to actually describe this in non-bike related terms, this bike is the equivalent of the short guy in high school who is so athletic and aggressive, nobody fought him, and he made varsity in every sport. The Ridgeback has absolutely changed my mind on how capable a trail bike can be. It punches way above its weight, making full use of all 135 millimeters of travel. Sometimes it is so confidence inspiring, it'll write checks you hope your technique and cojones can cash. It'll get you into trouble if you're not careful. The Topaz comes with a 3-position shock. It's got the firm, mid, and soft, and they're all very noticeable. I always keep mine in the mid position for 2 reasons. One, the bike is efficient enough climbing. I don't feel it wallowing and justifying the firm mode. And then while descending, I find the soft switch too soft, and it lacks a little bit of pedaling support as you're coming out of a corner. And then over the rough stuff, it just feels a little bit too undamped, meaning that rear wheel is moving a lot more than I anticipate. This might be different for you, but I just put mine in the mid position and don't ever touch it. The chainstay length was immediately noticeable, making the bike very balanced at speed. Over the rough and the corners, this really stands out. This forced my attack position to be a lot more aggressive, pushing my hips back to really get in the right stance for descending and cornering. The longer chainstays also made me get more aggressive when it comes to pulling the front wheel up in the attack position, because that pendulum does take just a little bit more effort to get that front wheel up. But once you get it up, much like the climbing section with that ledge, once you get that front wheel up and over your obstacle, the back wheel follows, no problem. The extra length of the bike makes the front wheel stick to the ground really well. This bike is made to keep you going fast, and the overall feel of the bike between the bike fit and the robustness of the frame can totally fool you. Over the chunder, it keeps both wheels on the ground and generally able to keep your line. It's ready to point and plow, you just need to be able to hang on. For a trail bike, this surprised me. The bike itself is ready to charge through the rough, and it takes a while to get your suspension dialed in to really keep up with the bike. You do hit your limits though, as I did in the race. However, for everyday trail riding, this thing kicks some serious butt through the rough and the technical spots. When things do get rowdy, I wish that seat was just a little bit more out of the way. 150 is great for most of the time, but I have smashed my bits a few times as I've moved around on the bike. And in corners, the flop wasn't causing over or understeer at all. The mixer is such a knife in corners that I find it easy to oversteer, which in one hand is really awesome because at a moment's notice I find I can adjust my corner. The Ridgeback holds corner speed a whole lot differently. The back end is very tough to break loose and cut. You essentially have to pick a wide line and hold on because the Ridgeback is absolutely coming through. With the mixer, that flexibility in cornering can cause me to fall offline in a high speed wide corner, and that's where the Ridgeback really shines. It just feels planted as you go around these wide corners. It's not really awesome at super quick, tight corners without a lot of extra rider input. Those shorter chainstays might help with this, but the front end feels incredible. And once you're in that corner, that progressiveness of the rear shock, you just hit that rebound and it holds you, and it just feels incredible. That mid-stroke, I'm going to reference it a few more times, but that mid-stroke is very noticeable and very consistent. I really enjoy how that back end holds you as you're compressing it. Now, when it comes to jumping, the comments earlier about it being a little bit harder to pull the front wheel up start showing. I'm a go fast, keep the jumps low kind of rider, and the bike caters to that riding style. If you're a really poppy rider, just keep that in mind. You're going to have to work a little bit harder for that pull motion as you're going over a jump. You can still pop this thing. It's fun to do, but I'm not sure I'd say this was a poppy bike. It's just much more at home, pointing your bike straight and crushing things along the way. However, when your talent runs out, that mid-stroke, once again, on both front and rear has saved my bacon a few times. The mid-stroke coupled with the longer geo and stiff frame are an excellent combo for the lack of skill I seem to have. when it comes to jumping. Now drops, I want to showcase this drop here in particular. This has so many examples of how capable this bike is. This is about a 5 to 6 foot drop into relative flat and immediately has a chunky right hand corner. As you come off the drop, the predictable and supportive mid-stroke does two things. One is it doesn't buck you forward as you leave that little lip, and two, when you land, it easily recovers and asks for more. And then when you break into that right-hander, the suspension settles down, it doesn't skip, and it gets you exactly where you need to be to hit that corner. I had some stupid technique during the race and I didn't hit this thing as clean, but the bike handled my lack of talent and kept me going down the hill with both wheels on the ground. Hopefully this helps paint a little bit of a picture for how this thing rides. I'm always open to help you understand more, and the comment below with any questions you might have. Overall, I cannot express how much I enjoy riding this thing. I'm a pretty aggressive rider and it has handled everything I've thrown at it. It has never once felt underbiked outside of when you get into really high speed chunk, but that's just the nature of a smaller travel trail bike. I do not at all say that's the bike's fault. It's much more just the trail, and every once in a while things get a little bit rowdy. The bike's been extremely capable, it's been very confidence inspiring, and it's been a great bike for me. And being able to ride something made in the US that isn't shipped from overseas, that you can actually call and talk to the people who make it, is just, there's something to that I can't quite describe, that I really appreciate, and am glad that we have the opportunity to actually make these choices and support a more local bike company. I'm gonna be dropping a lot more videos on this bike, just riding it overall around a whole bunch of the excellent trails that we have in the Spokane area. I've got a lot of adventures planned with this thing, and then whenever traveling, this is likely going to be my go-to bike as opposed to the Mixer with that 165. This thing's extremely capable, and I am so blown away with how much I've enjoyed riding this thing. The capability of this bike is so much more fun. I think a bike is the most fun to ride when you're in that last 20% of its capacity. With that smaller travel, you get to that fun portion much more easily. It's a fun bike. I do not at all regret my decision to go with it, and it's probably going to take the place as my main squeeze when it comes to picking a bike to go ride. With all that being said, I hope this paints a picture, and I hope that you guys might consider the Foes Ridgeback as your next trail bike. It catches a lot of attention on the trail because it's just so unique looking, and the ride quality absolutely backs up how good it looks in person. If you do end up giving them a call, let them know you found me, and just tell them that you learned a little bit about it, and they'd probably love to hear that feedback. I'd love to hear that feedback. I hope that they're at least considered for your next bike. So if you've got any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I'll get back to you as quick as I can. I enjoy talking about this. I enjoy going over all the bike nerdery, and I hope you guys can get out and ride. Woo.